Hi, I'm Tom Gruber. I'm the co-founder of Humanistic.AI. I'm known as the co-founder of Siri and head of the Siri Advanced Development Group at Apple. The origin of Siri, well, there's the idea of Siri and then there's the product Siri. And the idea of a personal virtual assistant, that's been around for a long time. It was shown by a video in 1987 by Apple, in which they had like an iPad-looking thing and a little talking head in the corner that would do Siri type things, talk to you, be the user interface. So we all knew that idea, but the idea of Siri was to do it in 2010. So actually we started Siri the late 2007, just after iPhone 1. And we sort of guessed and predicted that the mobile era would start. And then also the AI piece, there was enough AI technology then, we knew we could build a virtual assistant. And we also knew that the speech recognition, which is kind of the hardest of the AI pieces, was almost ready. And 2 years after we started the project, the data and the speech recognition quality had gone up just enough so it was barely good enough. And then a year later, after we'd been at Apple for a year, the data was good enough so it was really good enough. And the third thing is that even in those early days, 2008, there were very few companies who understood the power of the elastic cloud and actually driving your app from the cloud. So we had what we call big think in the cloud, small screen in the phone. So the big think was we could put a very complicated AI system with like dozens of computers involved in every single query. And it could call dozens of other services around the world in milliseconds and do real-time speech recognition and then return the result to a tiny little phone. And that model still persists today. So those were really the idea of Siri. In the end, we were able to pull off the vision that we all wanted it. We just waited until we were able to do it. Well, the team was really important, but the real goal here is to have a small enough team so that everyone's on the same page and everyone's very highly aligned in what they're trying to do, but also a diverse enough team so everyone had their specialty and was doing their thing. And we had 24 people, and that's all we had. And we only gave ourselves 2 years to do it. And we knew that there were the right pieces to do the various pieces of tech. I sort of brought in the old school AI technology, and there was another person who brought the software engineering technology and so on. And so that was a piece of it, the timing part. Also the fact is understanding the ecosystem we're operating in. So this is a world when the iPhone, when it had just been announced, they had one carrier. It wasn't good coverage really back then, but where everybody was betting on the future. And so how do we know what's going to happen with the mobile industry? The very idea that there was going to be a lot of broadband and that was going to drive demand on the phone was a new idea. And the other thing was that if you lived on a phone, you had to have an interface other than typing and mousing on keyboard. You know, that just wasn't going to work. But it turns out that once you have the new interface where you just carry it around and talk to it, the thing you want to do is do things in the world, not ask questions. So that drove the vision of the company towards e-commerce and things like booking restaurants and hotels and doing all this cool stuff you can do on the fly. So there was a lot of that focus that came from the vision, and the vision gave us sort of a direction, but then the ecology that we lived in, the business environment, the timing, the technology, sort of told us exactly where to go with the product. The vision was since 1987, but then the first real mainstream implementation was Siri, and so everyone wants the future. Well, the future came in steps. So the first step was essentially something called deep learning, which comes from neural networks that are very deep, many layers. And that actually is not a news to AI people, but it was not the dominant form of making AI in 2010. And it turned out that during the 2010s, 12, 13, 14, 15, a couple of things happened. One is that they discovered that they could use GPUs that were invented for the video game industry to train these models. And the other thing they discovered is that they make them really deep and huge and throw a lot of data at them, they start getting better. And so they got better in a couple of really important places. One was image recognition. All of a sudden we have computers that can say that's a picture of a cat reliably, but also the fact that I just said the words that's a picture of a cat, it could start recognizing that too in speech. So that was a big breakthrough, and it wasn't necessary to get Siri off the ground, but once that was there, we could use the data from all those users that Apple and Google and Amazon had acquired to create a loop, a feedback loop, a positive returns return. So that now all these companies' speech recognition got better and better and better using deep learning. But that deep learning wasn't enough to produce, say, ChatGPT. There was another thing. Because the way you train those things is you very expensively took all those pictures or the pieces of speech and you labeled them. This is what he actually said. This is what it actually is a picture of. And that's very expensive, and that humans have to do that, which means there's only so much data. And then in 2017, a team at Google discovered a technique called transformers that basically allowed it so that you could just let this thing loose on all the text on the internet, and without telling it what the text meant. And it would just kind of play a game of solitaire with the text. So I'm going to say, hold the next word down, tell me what the next word is. And it would play that game with itself. And it would play with a game of itself with enormous amounts of text, because it no longer had to be labeled, it could just be open text. And it could go with these GPUs. It could do the equivalent of 1,000 supercomputers of compute for months at a time. That was never possible before. And that sort of bet on scaling was what led to ChatGPT and GPT-4 and that breakthrough. Eventually you get this emergent effect of a thing that knows so much about language that you can relatively easily teach it to talk. Right? And by the way, they don't know how to talk when they come out of the oven, as it were. They have to do another stage, which essentially have humans again teaching it. This is what a normal conversation with humans is like. They do a bit of that. But because there's so much foundation already created by playing solitaire with the internet, that it already had enough about what human language means, that teaching it to have a polite conversation in a specific language was actually quite easy. Right, well now we're at the point where we have this technology we've all experienced, the GPT-4 and so on, and the equivalents from other companies. They have this basic foundation, they call a foundation model or a large language model, that allows it to understand language very well. But understanding language itself isn't a business problem. But the new thing is that a system that you can just talk to tell it what to do, and that understands the content of what knowledge workers do, like it understands when we write emails and memos and so on, kind of what the words mean, can now be an assistant in those tasks. So the question is how? How are they going to do this? The first wave of experimentation is already happening, where people just sort of say it in English. Hey, pretend you're an expert this and try that. And that sort of works. But the next level is essentially to get more like an engineer and say, well, actually, to solve this business problem over here, this workflow, is a bunch of steps with a lot of different skills. Let's tell the systems, the AI systems, to do each skill individually, and then let's combine the answers into the fully baked answers. So they're sort of telling it how to think about the problem, and then having it solve sub-problems. That's what people are doing today, called the agent approach. It's working fairly well to solve certain classes of problems. Now we use a bunch of tools. So as we get better at making that new layer, we're going to make it so that we can say even more abstract things like the business goal is this. So execute a plan to solve that business goal. For instance, call centers. The entire thing they do is essentially answer questions for people in a conversation. Well, that could be effectively automated over time. And so we're in that transition period right now. And how far are we till we automate entire industries? Well, it depends on the industry, but something like call center, I would say within 5 years or so, we're going to see the first fully automated ones. And there's already startups doing other things that people do now, kind of like the little chat bots you see in the websites when you buy things. They're always terrible and they never do what you want. Well, they might actually not be terrible in 5 years. They might actually completely understand what you're trying to do. Because all you have to do is give them every training manual you would have given to a call center person and have the AI do it. So I think those kind of industries are going to be fairly automated fully. But in most cases, in the next 5 years, we're going to see a transition where different industries augment the work they're doing with AI automation. So a good example is software engineering, where it's a huge business. I mean, trillions have spent a year on it. Obviously, programmers get paid a lot. There's not enough programmers to do everything we want to do. But you're not going to push a button and there'll be no programmers. So instead, what we're going to see is that the AI is going to be doing what used to be somewhat tedious coding. And the humans are going to be in the business of saying exactly what we want the program to do, specifying the problem and the requirements. And it's going to be a dance, because as the tools get better, you can say things a little bit easier. Right now, programming is effectively saying what you want to do in a minute detail. And that barrier will slide. And at some point, probably within 5 years, there'll be a class of applications which are effectively, quote, no code, which means that business people will be able to say what they want the program to do, and it will just execute that and get back to them and say if there's any problems. And you see the beginnings of this in a very mature area like website design, where it's a routine task. Everyone knows what the problem is and what the tools are. So the AIs are going to be able to be brought in to do all the detail coding. And the human user, which might be a marketing department, not a programmer, they can essentially say, here's my imaging, here's my brand guide, and so on. Please generate a site for me. I'm not special that the fact that I happen to live in California and Hawaii and so on. I could live anywhere in the world. I could live in New Zealand, and it's a nice place to live. So why wouldn't I? Well, the whole thing is virtual remote work is a superpower skill. And if you can master that, then you can be part of a global ecosystem, a competitive global business environment. Now, it sounds obvious in retrospect, but really going deep in that means that members of like the team in Wellington or in Auckland could be right there at peers with their colleagues in California, New York, or Europe. It should be an equal playing field. There doesn't have to be like, well, California has all the high tech and so on. It's no longer necessary to make the distinction. So the tips to be part of that global playing field are, of course, to understand what remote work's like and to make sure we understand the workflows and so on, the tools that one would use. Also, increasingly, to use AI in those places where asynchronous work is important. So have an AI be able to, for instance, take notes during meetings where everyone's not there at the real time and summarize things, or process action and task management things, or to take in, say, folks working in a different time zone, take in what they said the night before or did the night before for you and tell you in the morning what it was. These are all things these aren't like things that AI can do and change work overnight, but they're things that if you're thinking, I'm going to be part of a global team from day one, you would become good at using those tools. Throughout the history of AI, there's been two approaches people have taken. One is sort of machine-centric and one is humanistic. The machine-centric approach is a perfectly fine idea. The idea is, let's make AI for its own sake, and let's measure success by how well it competes with humans. So it beats a human at chess, at Go, and so on. Whereas another way of thinking of AI has been about how do you use AI to do something humans already want to do, but a little bit better. And that's humanistic AI. And the key differences between the two is that in the case of humanistic AI, it tends to be augmenting human capability as opposed to automating it. A good example would be like eyeglasses. They're augmenting technology. And microscopes are too, and telescopes are. It's just not like we have to be able to see microscopically in order for it to be augmenting. It can make us see better. And so the AI, now because it's cognitive enhancement, it can make us think better in ways, kind of like glasses make us see better. And that's humanistic AI. When you look at the question of saying whether AI should replace jobs or augment them through this lens of humanistic AI, you see you actually have a choice. We could say, wow, it's very exciting. We get to now eliminate huge numbers of jobs and make more profits for the company. That's a great goal, you know. You could also say, well, we can also make the same amount of profits by making the same people more productive or making better products, right? So that's the humanistic approach. Now, what are some examples of that? Well, even collectively as a society, we already have problems that we're trying to solve, cognitive problems. We're trying to figure out how to do nuclear fusion, for example. We're always struggling with life sciences. So an example even in life sciences, in biology, one of the thinking problems that biologists have is the protein folding problem, which is essentially, it's a lot to explain, but essentially everything that makes life work is based on proteins. And the way they work is their shape. And their shape can't be predicted from their formula. We know what the amino acids are, but the shape itself, it folds up in the living system in a way that's unpredictable. And yet, if you could predict that, then you could figure out which drugs to design and other things. So that's been a problem in biology for decades. And it would take maybe 6 months to do one protein by doing it in a laboratory to figure out its structure. And Google DeepMind made an AI system that can compute the three-dimensional structure from the amino acid sequence. So they solved the problem entirely. So now we basically have the equivalent of a microscope to use in this field by solving an important cognitive problem. And now 1 million biologists can use this tool to decode the proteins they're working on and advance their drug discovery, for example. You can be playing games with nature, say, that you want to solve. that can make a big difference on the impact you can have on the world. By the way, they just won the Nobel Prize for that work. The case of something like agricultural business. This is a good case where there actually is both machine-centric and humanistic. So way back when, 10, 20 years ago probably, I remember one of the first advanced robotics applications was actually a sheep shearing robot that could get close and really shear this thing really fast. And that was a tool, and everyone's like, oh no, it's going to replace all the sheep shearers and so on. And it didn't. It just made people more productive. And in fact, did a kind of part of the job that they didn't like doing so much. But fast forward to today, you can imagine again having that choice. What if you had an AI technology? If you freed up that work, what would those humans do? Well, if it's a low-level task, like milking a cow or shearing a sheep, the humans can do other things. It's not like that's the only thing. That's not like a trade they've inherited from their parents for generations, right? They can learn to do other things. And so what are these other things? Well, now with the right tools, that same dairy farmer might really understand like disease prediction and optimization of the feed and all these other things where the AI tools can empower them with the best practices and do the diagnostics and so on, the thinking parts of that job, and let them focus on those kinds of problems. Maybe even optimization of when they sell it into the market, when to sell it and so on. These are all thinking problems that if they're embraced by the AI, those are humanistic. Even though they're making money, they're humanistic because they're servicing a need the human already has by augmenting their cognition. Well, I can't imagine in a 20-person company having a person who's doing such a low-level job that it would just automate it away with AI. Usually those are jobs that only can be afforded by bigger companies. So like on the Siri team, everybody was essential because they're all skilled at what they do. But every one of those people today is now going to be augmented by the AI tools. So if there's a software engineering team in the company, they really can step up right now. They don't have to wait. Those tools are already coming. I have a 4-person engineering team on one company, and we doubled our productivity almost overnight by using the AI tools. So we're punching above our weight because of the AI thing. Let's say you wanted to do social media marketing, because that's sort of how you get your product out. And you can use generative AI to do that content. Now, you don't just give it to the AI and say, you do it, but it means that it can generate mock-ups and comps and so on that you can review rapidly and say, yep, I'll take that one, I'll take that one. Well, I want that one, but I want it better this way. You can iterate that way. And any size company can do that. I see a lot of fear because content creation is now under threat. But even something like someone who's really good at Photoshop, say, for instance. I used to be okay at Photoshop, but when it was above my head, I would hire my friend to do it for me. He doesn't use it at all anymore. He just uses Midjourney, other kinds of generative AI tools. And so do I. It's more productive now to generate you have a visual idea and you want to realize it. It might have taken 2 hours to do it in Photoshop, and now you can do it in 5 minutes, at least to get the first version, and start iterating. So I think that's what we're going to see. And those folks that hop on the bandwagon, so to speak, and embrace and learn these tools now, even though they're somewhat hard to use now, it's going to pay off because they're going to be on the top of the curve as they get easier to use and more people can use them. There's kind of two kinds of AI. Most of the AI that's deployed in business today is not the fancy new LLM chatbot AI. It's supervised learning on data. The rules there are you tell it what to optimize for and it learns a model that optimizes for that goal. And the problem is we used to ignore the externalities in those goals. So the real ethical principle that's been true for 10 years is be sure you know what you're telling it to optimize for when you train a model to do something. If you only optimize for, say, a single metric, which is, engagement at all costs or profit at all costs, you may accidentally have a side effect, which is going to harm your reputation, your business, or society. So the other kind of AI that is to embrace is this large language model, this conversational language-based AI. And again, you be aware of the potential unintended consequences because these AI chatbots can't stop themselves from just saying things. They can say things that aren't true, which is called hallucination. They can also say things that are off-brand. And there's no clear guardrails that at least the manufacturers of those foundation models put in place to protect your company's brand. So just be aware that it's exposing that directly to a customer without a lot of control is a bit of a risk. As AI becomes more prevalent, we need to think of two kinds of ethical dilemmas. One is, what are the direct harms that you can do with this? So a simple case of this, been around for a while, if you're going to use it in HR decisions, if you're going to make it in hiring and firing, promotion decisions, be aware that the training data that model is built on could be highly biased in all kinds of ways, racially, gender, and so on. Carelessly just saying, well, the machine said X is an irresponsible use. That's a direct harm. There's more likely to be an opportunity cost kind of harm. If you're making choices about which kind of AI projects to use, you can choose between those that might give your bottom line a little bit of a bunch or boom pump hero, something like that, or you could choose one that might make your entire workforce more productive, but it'd be harder to measure. Okay? It's a tough ethical choice, but if you take the humanistic approach, basically you might find that if your employees are feeling like they're more powerful because of the technology and not being displaced by it, they probably will be more powerful. They probably will be more effective at helping you meet your business goals than using a thing that happens to tweak their productivity in some minor way but disenfranchises them. So that's the problem with AI. It's kind of hard to force them to be a certain way. Just be aware that they're a bit sloppy, in terms of their outcomes, and be ready for that. So have policies in place so that to tolerate the noisiness in which these AI systems make decisions. And that's part of it, be resilient in that space. And ask the question another way. Yeah, well, there's a lot of policies we've already seen now, especially in large corporations, where someone takes an analysis and goes, you know what, this endangers our trade secrets. So we can't have this AI be learning from what we say in meetings, say, or what we say in our documents. So put a strong boundary against that. That's one way of doing it. Or there might be policies that says, well, we can use it in programming, but not in marketing, or something like that. I think there can also be policies at the executive level, especially for the larger companies, that says, if we're going to set in place, say, for instance, incentive bonuses or alignment incentives of some kind, that then we don't accidentally incentivize only the technically easy to measure things, which tend to drive things. And because AI is going to be able to automate more things, and you're going to say, well, what do we optimize it for when it's automating those things? Well, we have to somehow leave in place the human judgment about whether this is the right thing to do and not just let it be a number somewhere on a report that can be kind of out of control. This is not an abstract thing. This happened in social media where, a lot of people got addicted in a few years and a lot of harms were done because there was only the one metric of engagement, which is driven the advertising dollar. That was the only thing that drove those AIs, and those AIs were optimized on the best world data in the world. And it really wasn't the intention. They were trying to connect the world and make people talk to each other, but they ended up making other things happen too. So that can happen on a small scale too. So you can put in place those policies from the beginning. I'm not sure you need, especially in the small and medium business size, a dedicated AI safety team, per se. I think anybody who runs a big AI shop should have at least one person, like who runs a research group, should definitely have that. But not everyone can afford to have a whole headcount in that area. So, but I think there's policies, just like we don't always have IT security full-time person, we might have like a CIO does it in part-time or something. You can have that same thing here, or have a small committee that meets, because these aren't everyday decisions. Like I said, the big ones are like opportunity cost decisions, like which projects do we do? And then optimization decisions, like what do we tell it to do? And I think you can make those relatively but again, it doesn't require any special knowledge and skills. You think about it as if you were hiring an outsourced firm. It just happens to be an AI. And let's say you didn't trust them at all. You didn't, and not that you distrusted them, you had no experience with them, but you were told you had to use them. So how would you manage such an outsourced source? You would be very careful of what you trusted it with, and you'd be very clear about what you told it to do and not do. And you need to do that kind of thing with AI. The biggest risk to businesses today from technology is going to be attacked by cyber attacks. And they're going to be AI-powered cyber attacks. So there's no easy answer. The cyber defense business, as it were, understands this problem and will probably offer to sell you services and so on that help with this. But the problem is that the big language models are democratizing or weaponizing this ability to write code that a million bots can use in parallel to go attack somebody. And the code can get smarter and smarter as it attacks. That used to be the province of a few very skilled hackers, but the AI is making it possible for that to be really common. So that's, to me, the get ready for the storm problems that will keep CEOs up a little bit at night. And again, I don't have a solution in that space other than, make sure that's on your list of things to think about before putting any things online. The EU approach in particular is think of AI as an application, as a technology that drives an application. So think of the application first. So is this critical infrastructure? Is this education? Is this healthcare? What is the application? And regulate from the outside in against risks in that domain. So that's how they're basically approaching it. If you design a system that's resilient against those kind of risks, so let's say, for example, if it's critical infrastructure, if you're going to use AI in the train system here or whatever, since it's critical infrastructure, you want to think about catastrophic failures, single points failures, and so on. And then how does AI contribute to that? So again, if a cyber attack by an amateur who's now empowered with AI to build bots online could in fact expose weakness in the defenses there, then double down on the protection there. So that's one thing. I don't think you have to innovate in the space of, as a country, in the space of ethical use of AI. And in fact, I think the EU is leading the world in this. And one of the things they're doing as a best practice is they're educating their policymakers. It's not just some opinion. I mean, they really spend years thinking about and studying AI ethical governance and are having thoughtful theories of how to do that. In the face of a technology, AI is a technology, we don't know what it's going to be in 1 year. It's changing all the time. So how do you regulate a moving target like that? Those are the kind of things you got to think about deeply and in advance, and they're doing that. I think the basic principle is it's going to be possible for everyone to get better at their jobs by using AI tools. Which tools depends on which jobs. And so it's not the boss's job to tell the employee necessarily that you must use this tool for this task. But in the spirit of, empower people to figure it out. If you gave people options, I think you'll find that the more innovative and the less risk-taking, more risk-taking people will go ahead and jump on, get in deeper, get their feet wetter in this technology, and they'll tell you what's going to help them be more productive. If you're listening to that feedback loop, then from that you can generate policies that both encourage more experimentation like that, but also knows how to put the fences around it so it's done safely.